Before we dive any further, viewer discretion is advised. What you are about to hear is presented for entertainment purposes only. The following account explores a hypothetical scenario, dramatized to illustrate the volatile nature of live television and the unpredictable collisions of power, ego, and reputation. What happens when a daytime television titan pushes beyond the unspoken limits, only for a Hollywood icon to push back with devastating force? You are about to witness what many would later describe as the most incendiary live television moment of a generation. This was not supposed to be history in the making. It was scheduled as just another celebrity segment, another polished conversation designed to fill airtime, boost ratings, and move smoothly into the next commercial break. Instead, it would unravel into a showdown so raw, so volatile, that it would end with one of television's most formidable personalities walking off her own set. A departure so abrupt it would echo across the industry for years to come. If you believe you have already seen on-air tension, prepare to be re-educated. And before you decide where you stand, join the conversation. Leave a comment with your theory about what really happened behind the scenes, because this story has layers. Layers that may fundamentally alter the way you perceive daytime television, celebrity interviews, and the unseen maneuvers that shape what viewers are allowed to see. As the broadcast resumed, a palpable buzz of anticipation filled the View studio. The audience murmured softly, sensing something electric in the air, even if they couldn't yet name it. Studio lights burned hot, cameras glided silently into position, and producers hovered just out of frame, headsets pressed tight, bracing for whatever might unfold. Joy Behar sat in her customary command chair, the undisputed center of gravity at the table. She gave her notes one final, almost ceremonial shuffle. It was a small gesture, but longtime viewers recognized it instantly. That shuffle meant something. It was a tell, a signal. Her eyes lifted and locked onto camera too, and there it was, that familiar glint. The look her audience knew always preceded a storm. "Welcome back to the View," Joy announced, her unmistakable New York accent slicing cleanly through the studio air. Her voice carried confidence born of decades in front of a live audience. We're joined today by Academy Award winner Kevin Spacey, who's here to discuss his forthcoming independent film. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you. Across from the panel sat Kevin Spacey, a study in controlled precision. He wore a charcoal, gray suit tailored to perfection, understated yet deliberate. His hands rested calmly in his lap, fingers loosely interlaced. His posture was relaxed, but not casual. Every inch of him communicated discipline. His face held a polite, almost neutral expression, the kind that revealed nothing and invited no easy conclusions. It was a mask, carefully constructed, one that had served him well through decades of Hollywood warfare. "Thank you for the invitation, Joy," Kevin replied smoothly. His voice was measured, deliberate, every word chosen with care. "It's always interesting to be on live television." That single word, "interesting," hung in the space between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. To the casual viewer, it sounded harmless. To anyone accustomed to media battles, it sounded like a warning. Joy leaned forward slightly, the way a seasoned interviewer does when she senses opportunity. Her pen began tapping softly against her note. Pad tap, 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 a quiet rhythmic beat. Loyal viewers knew this habit well. It was not nervousness, it was anticipation, the drumming of a mind already several moves ahead. The other hosts shifted in their seats, glancing between Joy and their guest. There was a subtle tightening in the atmosphere, a sense that the conversation might not follow the neat, rehearsed outline laid out by producers during the commercial break. The audience fell quiet, instinctively aware that something unscripted was approaching. Kevin maintained his composure, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Years in the spotlight had taught him that silence, when used correctly, could be more powerful than any response. He waited. Joy smiled, but it wasn't warmth that reached her eyes, it was calculation. "So, Kevin," she began, her tone deceptively casual, "this project has generated a lot of conversation already. Some would say controversy follows you wherever you go." The pen stopped tapping. Behind the cameras, a producer stiffened. Kevin's gaze flickered briefly toward Joy, then back to the lens. The mask held firm. "Conversation is part of the business," he said evenly. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum. The audience shifted again, sensing the tightening coil beneath the words. This was no longer a routine press tour. This was a chess match unfolding in real time, each participant keenly aware that one misstep, one poorly chosen phrase, could ignite something neither side could fully control. Joy nodded slowly, as though satisfied, though the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She glanced down at her notes once more, then back up, eyes sharp. "And yet," she said, "live television has a way of revealing things, doesn't it?" Kevin didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, cameras rolled, millions watched, and in that charged stillness, it became clear to everyone in the studio, and to everyone at home, that this was no longer just an interview. It was the opening move in a confrontation that would spiral far beyond its allotted time, rewriting the rules of daytime television and leaving behind a moment so explosive it would be dissected, debated, and replayed long after the studio lights dimmed. What followed would not simply be remembered, it would be mythologized. What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken actress comes face to face with daytime television's most controversial host? What begins as a harmless conversation about charity and cinema quickly unravels into a moment so tense, so uncomfortable, that viewers would be talking about it for weeks. This is the story of how a routine appearance on a popular morning talk show spiraled into what many later called one of the most explosive confrontations in the history of daytime television. It was meant to be simple. Charlize Theron, an Academy Award-winning actress known not only for her powerful performances, but also for her long-standing humanitarian work, had been scheduled for a short 10-minute segment. The purpose was clear and carefully planned: promote her upcoming film and highlight the charitable foundation she had been running for over a decade, focusing on education and healthcare initiatives for children in Africa. Producers had emphasized that the segment should be warm, uplifting, and inspiring. The tone was supposed to celebrate generosity, compassion, and artistic achievement. Behind the scenes, the hosts were briefed extensively. Notes were distributed, talking points were underlined, and reminders were issued to keep the discussion positive and respectful. Everyone appeared to be on the same page. Everyone, that is, except Joy Behar. From the moment Charlize walked onto the set, something felt off. The studio lights glowed warmly, the audience applauded enthusiastically, and the familiar theme music faded as the hosts turned their attention to their guest. Whoopi Goldberg rose slightly from her chair, smiling broadly as she welcomed Charlize with genuine warmth. Sarah Haynes followed with an enthusiastic greeting, and Sunny Hostin nodded politely, offering a friendly smile. Their body language was open and inviting, signaling exactly the kind of atmosphere producers had intended. Joy, however, remained noticeably detached. She barely looked up as Charlize approached, instead flipping through her notes with intense concentration. Her expression was cool, almost calculating, as if she were preparing for a confrontation rather than a conversation. To some viewers, it might have seemed subtle, but those watching closely could sense the tension building before a single word had been spoken. As the show returned from commercial break, Whoopi addressed the camera with her usual confidence. She introduced Charlize as an Academy Award winner, praised her latest film, and highlighted her incredible work with children in Africa. The audience applauded again, and Charlize responded with a radiant smile, dressed elegantly in a tailored navy blazer that reflected both professionalism and ease. "Thank you so much for having me," Charlize said warmly. "I'm always excited to be here." Sarah smoothly guided the conversation toward the foundation. She spoke with admiration, noting that Charlize had been working in South Africa for more than 15 years. Charlize's face lit up as she described the mission of her organization. She spoke passionately about improving access to education and healthcare in underserved communities, explaining how her team had helped build 12 schools and 3 medical clinics. Her voice carried genuine pride, not in herself, but in the communities she worked alongside. The audience listened attentively. The mood in the studio was calm, respectful, and engaged, until Joy leaned forward. Without waiting for a natural pause, Joy cut in abruptly. Her tone shifted the atmosphere instantly. "That's interesting, Charlize," she said, her voice sharp and probing, "but I have to ask, Considering all the problems we have right here in America, don't you think it's a bit hypocritical to send money overseas when we have homeless children in our own backyard? The effect was immediate. The studio fell into an uneasy silence. Sunny and Sarah exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances, clearly caught off guard by the sudden change in tone. Whoopi's eyebrows rose in visible surprise, her body language signaling that this was not the direction the conversation was supposed to go. Charlie's smile faded just slightly. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the room itself was holding its breath. Cameras lingered on her face, capturing the instant where warmth met challenge. Yet instead of reacting defensively, she took a measured breath, straightened her posture, and maintained her composure. "I don't believe compassion has borders," Charlize began carefully. Her voice was calm but firm, each word chosen with intention. "Helping children in Africa doesn't mean ignoring the struggles here in America. It means recognizing that suffering exists everywhere, and we all have a responsibility to address it where we can." Joy tilted her head, unconvinced, clearly preparing to push further. The tension thickened as the audience shifted in their seats. This was no longer a feel-good segment about charity and film. It had become a philosophical clash about responsibility, privilege, and global empathy. Whoopi attempted to redirect the conversation, gently interjecting to bring the focus back to Charlie's work and upcoming movie, but the damage had already been done. The mood was fractured, and viewers could sense that something had gone terribly wrong. What was meant to be a brief promotional appearance had transformed into a public confrontation, unfolding live and unfiltered. As the exchange continued, voices tightened, interruptions increased, and the sense of control slipped away. Charlize, clearly frustrated but still dignified, defended her position with clarity and conviction. Joy, unwavering in her challenge, pressed harder, framing her questions in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like accusation. By the time the segment ended, the atmosphere was electric, and not in a good way. What followed would dominate headlines, ignite social media debates, and leave audiences divided. Some praised Charlize for her poise and moral clarity, while others accused Joy of deliberately sabotaging the segment for controversy. What began as a routine interview had become a defining television moment, one that reminded viewers how quickly civility can collapse when agendas collide. And as Charlize stood up and walked off the set, the chaos left behind was unmistakable, a moment of live television that no amount of planning could undo. Joy folded her arms, leaning back in her chair, as if she had just been challenged rather than warned. The smug confidence in her posture suggested she believed she still held the upper hand. Her lips curled into a thin, knowing smile, the kind that communicated superiority without a single word. The audience could feel it, the invisible line that had already been crossed, whether Joy was willing to admit it or not. "I'm just saying what a lot of people at home are thinking," Joy replied coolly. "Celebrities live in a world of scripts and image management. Forgive me if I don't automatically assume every good deed comes from pure intentions." Charlize inhaled slowly, visibly steadying herself. Years of red carpets, hostile interviews, and public scrutiny had taught her how to keep her emotions in check, but this was different. This was personal. Her charity work was not a talking point crafted by publicists. It was something she had poured years of her life into, often away from cameras and headlines. "You're not questioning my intentions," Charlize said evenly. "You're dismissing the lives of the people we've helped. You're reducing real children, real families, to props in some imaginary PR campaign you've invented in your head." Joy shrugged. "That's your interpretation." "No," Charlize shot back, her voice sharpening. "That's exactly what you're doing." Whoopi glanced toward the producer's table off camera, clearly hoping for a signal to cut to commercial. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together, while Sunny stared straight ahead, her expression tense and unreadable. No one wanted to be in the middle of this, yet no one could look away. Joy leaned forward again, sensing the drama had fully captured the room. "Let me ask you something, Charlize. If this work is so important to you, why talk about it on television at all? Why not just do it quietly?" Charlize let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Because awareness brings funding. Because visibility brings support. Because silence doesn't build schools or clinics, she replied without missing a beat. And because platforms like this one reach people who might actually want to help, if they're not being distracted by baseless accusations. The audience murmured softly, some nodding, others shifting uncertainly. Joy's eyes flicked briefly toward the crowd, then back to Charlie's. Convenient answer, she said. That was it. The last restraint Charlie's had been holding onto finally snapped, not into shouting, not into insults, but into something far more cutting, clarity. You don't get to sit there and rewrite my life to fit your cynicism, Charlie said, her voice now resonating with unmistakable authority. You don't know what I've seen. You don't know the names of the children I've held while they were sick, or the communities that asked for nothing except a chance. And you certainly don't get to question my integrity, because it makes for good television. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time, words seemed to hesitate. The air in the studio felt heavy, charged as if every camera, every microphone, was waiting for what would come next. Charlie's continued, unwavering. You asked whether I can be an actress and a humanitarian at the same time. The answer is yes. Human beings are complex. We are allowed to tell stories for a living and still care deeply about the real world. Those things are not mutually exclusive, unless you need them to be for the sake of cheap narrative. Applause broke out in scattered pockets of the audience before quickly being hushed by producers. Joy's expression hardened, but the earlier smugness was gone, replaced by something closer to irritation. Well, Joy said stiffly, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. Charlie stood up slowly, adjusting her blazer with deliberate calm. No, she said, shaking her head. This isn't a disagreement. This is you trying to undermine work that saves lives, and I won't sit here and let you do that. Whoopi finally found her voice again. All right, we're going to take a break. But Charlie's was already stepping away from the table. She turned. The accusation landed like a perfectly aimed volley, sharp and unmistakable. It struck its target with devastating precision. Kevin's hands, moments earlier resting calmly, almost casually, tightened into a white, knuckled grip around the arms of his chair. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer smooth or diplomatic. It had become something else entirely, an instrument honed to a razor's edge. Joy. Kevin said evenly, though the air around his words seemed to vibrate, I must insist you stop right there. The tone was controlled, level, but beneath it lay an unshakable foundation of authority. This was not a request. It was a line drawn with surgical precision. You are weaving extraordinarily grave narratives on live television, he continued, his eyes fixed on her, unblinking, and I strongly suggest you become acutely aware of the ground you are choosing to tread upon. But Joy Behar was no longer moderating a conversation. She was in her element now, fully unleashed. This posture, this confrontation, was the very stance that had carved her name into the stone of daytime television history. I am being careful, Kevin, she replied coolly. I'm taking meticulous care to pose the questions that demand answers. The very questions others have been too intimidated to voice. Intimidated, Kevin echoed, arching a single eyebrow in theatrical disbelief. He repeated the word slowly, as though tasting it. That is a fascinating choice from the lexicon. He leaned forward slightly. Are you suggesting that my colleagues, your peers, have been cowed by my presence? I'm suggesting. Joy shot back instantly, that it's long past time someone asked the necessary questions without fear of bruising delicate egos. Perhaps it's time a voice was given to what every viewer at home is already thinking. A profound silence fell over the set. It was not the absence of sound. It was something heavier, almost tangible, like a wire pulled taut to its breaking point. Even the audience seemed afraid to breathe. When Kevin finally spoke again, his voice dropped to a whisper, one far more menacing than any raised shout. And pray tell, Joy, he said softly, what is it that you believe everyone is thinking? The question was a gauntlet thrown down, gleaming beneath the studio lights. The co-hosts were visibly panicked now. Bodies shifted, eyes darted. Silent glances flew across the table in frantic exchange. Whoopi's hands hovered mid-gesture, frozen between intervention and surrender. The audience could feel it too, the chilling realization that this was no longer an interview. It was an unraveling, happening in real time. Joy, however, seemed to feed on the chaos. I think, she declared, her voice firm and unwavering. People are wondering how a man can simply reappear and expect a hero's welcome, as if history can be erased. A ripple passed through the crowd. They're wondering about accountability, she continued, about consequences, about that ancient question humanity never stops asking, whether immense talent grants someone permission to simply move on. Kevin's response, when it came, was delivered with the chilling precision of a master performer who understood the weight of every syllable. "Joy," he said quietly, his voice now laced with undeniable menace, "allow me to ask you a question." The studio leaned in. "Are you absolutely certain you wish to continue down this road?" he asked. "Here, on this stage, for all to see." He paused, "because this is a threshold. Once crossed, there is no return, and I am not at all convinced you are prepared for where this path ultimately leads." The threat was no longer implied. It stood plainly between them, the central character in the drama. But Joy Behar had built an empire by never backing down. The glint of danger in Kevin's eyes did not register as a warning to her. It registered as an invitation. Fuel for an inferno already raging. "Is that a threat, Kevin?" Joy asked sharply, her voice slicing clean through the tension. "Because if it is, I believe our audience has a right to know the true character of the man sitting before them." A soft, mirthless laugh escaped Kevin's lips. "Threatening you?" he replied calmly. "No, Joy. I am attempting to save you from yourself." His gaze never wavered. "You are marching into a battle of wits for which you are tragically, fatally unarmed, hurling accusations on live television without a moment's consideration for the wreckage left behind. The only wreckage I'm concerned with." Joy shot back instantly. "Is what happens when the truth remains buried?" She leaned forward, her posture unmistakably predatory. "And the truth," she continued, "is that certain individuals believe they can launder their reputations with a handful of carefully curated interviews, expecting the world to suddenly develop amnesia. And what version of history do you believe you possess?" Kevin countered, his voice dropping into a deceptively gentle register that sent a chill through the room. "Because I am utterly fascinated to hear the tale you've convinced yourself is real." A silent panic rippled through the set. Joy's co-hosts were now sending frantic, unseen signals. Whoopi raised a subtle hand in a wordless plea for de-escalation. A producer could be seen mouthing something urgently from behind a camera, but Joy was locked in. A gladiator who saw only her opponent. The roaring coliseum around them had ceased to exist. "I think what happened," Joy declared, her voice swelling with conviction, "is that the powerful were allowed to write their own rules and escape their own consequences." Each word landed like a hammer blow. "And I think," she added, "some of them are now attempting to gaslight the entire world into believing it was all just a dream." A long, heavy silence followed. Kevin studied her closely now, like a grandmaster calculating 5 moves ahead. When he finally spoke, his tone carried the bone, deep authority that had made him a legend. "Joy," he said slowly, "you are making a grave and fundamental miscalculation." The studio was utterly still. "You are confusing a television platform with genuine power," he continued, every word measured. "You are mistaking loudness for righteousness." He leaned back slightly. "And you are moments away from a very harsh education." The air seemed to crack. And everyone, audience, hosts, viewers at home, knew with chilling certainty that there was no turning back now. What had begun as a carefully choreographed segment, an overture designed to glide smoothly into promotion and pleasantries, suddenly veered off script. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to anyone seasoned in the rituals of live television. Joy adjusted slightly in her chair, her posture straightening, her expression sharpening into the particular mask she wore when comfort was about to be disrupted. "You know, Kevin, I must ask," she began, her voice lowering into that deliberate frequency she used when she wanted to unsettle rather than entertain. It was a tone that carried implication without accusation, curiosity edged with threat. "There's a great deal of conversation in this town about accountability. I'm curious, how do you personally define the concept of redemption?" The question landed in the studio like a depth charge dropped into still water. The audience, moments earlier murmuring and rustling, fell into a sudden, collective silence. Somewhere off camera, a light hummed. A single muscle in Kevin's jaw twitched, just once, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to read human fault lines. Yet his smile, that meticulously engineered expression perfected over decades of public appearances, never faltered. "Well, Joy," he replied smoothly, each word placed with surgical precision, "I see redemption as being about the work we choose to do moving forward. It's about contributing something of value to the creative sphere and dedicating oneself to the craft that brought us all here in the first place." His delivery was calm, measured, and rehearsed, the kind of answer designed to satisfy without revealing, to deflect without appearing evasive. For a fraction of a second, it seemed as though the moment might pass, neatly folded back into the safety of generalities. But Joy did not retreat. "But is it truly that simple?" she pressed, her words sharpening as her eyes locked onto his. "Can an individual merely declare their own absolution and expect the world to fall in line behind them?" A ripple of unease moved through the studio. Even the other co-hosts sensed the shift, their smiles tightening, their bodies stiffening. It was clear now that Joy had stepped beyond the boundaries established in the pre-production meeting. This was no longer a promotional interview. It was hostile territory. Kevin slowly uncrossed his legs and leaned back in his chair. His posture remained composed, but something had changed. His gaze narrowed, focusing exclusively on Joy with an intensity that was no longer performative. The smile remained, but only barely. "I believe," he said carefully, "that we live in a society that allows individuals the opportunity to reconstruct their lives. That is what I am engaged in, focusing on my work, and on projects I find meaningful." "Correct." Joy interjected sharply, not allowing the echo of his words to settle. "But what about those who aren't granted the luxury of simply rebuilding?" Her voice began to rise, gaining an edge of righteous fury that resonated through the studio. "What about the people whose lives were permanently altered by the actions of powerful individuals in this industry? Are they simply meant to accept that someone is moving forward and focusing on their craft?" The pressure in the room became almost physical. Camera operators exchanged wide-eyed glances, hands tightening on their rigs. In the control booth, the producer could be seen gesturing frantically, signaling for Joy to pull back, to move on, to abort. The countdown fingers rose, then fell, unheard and ignored. Joy did not see them, or chose not to. Kevin's entire demeanor shifted, as though an unseen axis had rotated beneath him. The practiced smile evaporated entirely, replaced by the cold, calculating expression of a man who understood he was cornered on live television. "I came here today," he began, his voice firm, slipping into what sounded unmistakably like a prepared script, "to speak about my new film, a project centered on the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of art. I'm not entirely certain what specific insinuations you're making, but I believe it's essential that we avoid drawing assumptions about the inner lives and intentions of others." "Oh, I'm not assuming anything," Joy shot back, her expression now fully aligned with the persona millions recognized, yielding, relentless, and utterly fearless. "I'm asking direct questions about accountability, about responsibility, about a currency that seems increasingly devalued in our culture, especially when it comes to those who hold power, influence, and protection." The air felt charged, brittle, as though a single wrong word could shatter the entire production. The audience sat frozen, breath held, unsure whether they were witnessing a moment of truth or a career-ending implosion. Joy leaned forward, slightly now, her hands resting flat on the desk. "Redemption," she continued, "cannot be self-issued. It isn't a press release. It isn't a comeback tour or an awards campaign. For the people who were harmed, whose voices were silenced or sidelined, redemption isn't abstract. It's lived, or it's denied." Kevin's silence stretched just a beat too long. For the first time since the interview began, the illusion of control was visibly cracking, not exploding, but fracturing in thin, dangerous lines. The studio lights burned hotter, the cameras rolled without blinking, and somewhere deep in the machinery of live television, everyone understood they were witnessing something that could not be edited out, walked back, or forgotten. This was no longer an interview. It was a reckoning unfolding in real time.